My name is Cora Hayes. I was born and raised in Amsden, Massachusetts, a town where the rustle of turning pages in a leather-bound book was considered a more profound sound than a heartfelt laugh. In our home, a converted 19th-century schoolhouse filled with the scent of old paper and lemon polish, ambition was a currency, and the only accepted denominations were law, medicine, and academia. My father, Marcus Hayes, a tenured history professor at a small, prestigious liberal arts college, carried himself with the weight of the historical figures he studied. My mother, Beatrice, was a professor of classic literature, a woman who believed life, like a great novel, should follow a pre-approved narrative structure. To them, the protagonist of our family story was my older brother, Liam. He was their masterpiece. Liam could debate the nuances of constitutional law before he could legally drive and was accepted into Yale Law on early admission. The day his acceptance letter arrived, my father opened a bottle of vintage port he'd been saving for decades. He raised his glass, his eyes shimmering under the dim light of the library. "To the continuation of a legacy," he'd said, his gaze sweeping past me as if I were merely part of the scenery. "Some pursuits are fleeting, but a life of the mind is eternal." That comment was a carefully aimed arrow, and it found its mark. I didn't dislike learning. I was just captivated by a different kind of canvas. From the moment I first held a camera at age 10, I saw the world in frames, in light and shadow, in the untold stories etched on people's faces. By 16, I had taught myself graphic design and was creating websites for local businesses, a bakery, a small bookstore, a woman who repaired antique clocks. When the bookstore owner, Mrs. Finch, called me in tears to say she'd received her first ever online order from someone in California, a thrill shot through me that no textbook had ever provided. I thought my parents would see the value in this, in the tangible joy I was creating. Instead, my mother looked at the check Mrs. Finch had written me inside. "It's a charming hobby, Cora, but your LSAT prep course starts next month. Don't let these distractions derail you." My father was more direct. He glanced at the portfolio of my design work on my screen and stated, flatly, "There is no honor in being a tradesperson. The Hayes family builds institutions, they don't decorate them." The smile I offered them was a piece of armor I had learned to wear. The one thing our sprawling, book-lined house never had room for was a different dream. At every family dinner, Liam's accomplishments were the main course. Liam's mock trial team won the regional championship. Professor Albright says Liam has the sharpest legal mind he's seen in a decade. And for me, Cora, have you finished your application essay for Boston College? Your mother and I reviewed your first draft. It lacks a compelling thesis. In the spring of my senior year, the dining room table was buried under a mountain of law school brochures my parents had curated. Harvard, Yale, Columbia. They were maps to a world I had no desire to explore. My heart hammered against my ribs as I finally spoke the words that had been living under my tongue for months. "I'm not applying to law school. I'm starting my own design and branding company. I've already registered the business name, and I have 5 clients and nearly $7,000 in savings." A silence fell over the room, heavy and suffocating. My mother's hand flew to her chest as if I'd struck her. My father slowly folded his reading glasses and placed them on the table with deliberate, chilling precision. His voice, when it came, was low and sharp. "That will not be happening. Not while you live under this roof." The look in his eyes wasn't anger or disappointment. It was a cold, academic bewilderment, as if he were examining a flawed specimen that defied all known principles. I didn't argue. I simply stood, walked to my room, and began to pack. A week later, with 2 suitcases, my aging laptop, and a quiet, steely resolve, I left home. There was no tearful goodbye, no "call us when you get there." They were certain I would be back within a month, a prodigal daughter ready to admit her folly. My first apartment was a 3rd-floor walk-up in a brick building in Providence, Rhode Island. It was barely 500 square feet, with a single radiator that hissed and clanked, and a window that rattled with every passing bus. But as I stood in the middle of the empty room, the afternoon sun slanting through the dusty glass, I felt a sense of ownership I had never known. The kitchen was a tiny alcove where I could touch both walls at once. I bought a secondhand desk and placed it in the corner of the living room, my new headquarters. Each morning, I'd wake before sunrise, the chill of the apartment seeping into my bones, and brew coffee in a cheap drip machine. My business was called Hearth and Harrow, a name that spoke to my mission, to give small, local food producers, farmers, cheesemakers, artisan bakers a beautiful and functional online presence. I believed in the power of their stories, in the soil on their hands, and the passion in their work. I built them e-commerce sites, designed their logos, and photographed their products, taking a small percentage of their online sales. The first few months were a brutal lesson in humility. I sent hundreds of cold emails. Most went unanswered. A few potential clients asked which university I'd attended for design. When I admitted I was self-taught, the conversation would invariably end. My savings dwindled with terrifying speed. I lived on pasta with butter, day-old bread from the bakery I worked for, and endless cups of tea. The fear was a living thing, a cold shadow that sat with me during the long, quiet nights. I called my mother once, desperate to hear a familiar voice. When she learned I hadn't enrolled in night classes or reconsidered my path, her tone turned icy. "Well, Cora, you've made your choice. Don't expect us to applaud it." The click of the phone ending the call echoed in the silence of my tiny apartment. I sat on the floor, my back against the cold wall, and didn't move for a very long time. After 4 months, Hearth and Harrow had 3 clients: a woman who made small batch jams, a family with an apple orchard an hour outside the city, and an elderly man named Mr. Silas, who kept bees and sold honey at a local market. He called me the picture girl and paid me in jars of honey and $20 bills. Their meager commissions barely covered my internet bill, but they were proof that my idea wasn't entirely foolish. Just as I thought I might be gaining a foothold, disaster struck. One rainy March evening, my external hard drive, which held all my client work and all my photography, Word, clicked and died. The data recovery service quoted me a price of nearly $2,000, a sum as astronomical to me as a trip to the moon. I sat on my floor, surrounded by invoices I couldn't pay and the deafening silence of my failed technology, and thought, they were right. What if they were right all along? That night, feeling I had nothing left to lose, I went to a free business networking event at a local library. It was a last-ditch effort to feel less alone. That's where I met Evelyn Reed. She was a woman in her late 50s with a sleek silver bob, a simple black dress, and an air of unshakable calm. She was the founder of a logistics and supply chain consultancy, and she spoke about scaling with a clarity that cut through the noise in my head. When the event ended, I approached her, my hands trembling as I held out my poorly printed business card. "I'm Cora," I stammered. "I build websites for small food producers. I have no formal training, but I have real clients and a little bit of revenue." Evelyn took the card, her gaze steady and intelligent. She didn't smile, but she didn't dismiss me either. "Let me see your work," she said. I opened my laptop and showed her the sites I'd built. She studied them for a long moment, then looked at the meager sales data I'd tracked in a spreadsheet. "Your designs are beautiful," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "But you're selling the wrong thing. You're not selling a website to one farmer at a time. You're selling a system. You've built a micro-logistics platform. You need to be selling that platform to the boutique grocery stores that stock these farmers' products." It was as if she had opened a door to a room I never knew existed. We talked for over an hour, sketching out a new business model on a napkin. As I walked home through the damp Providence streets, my broken hard drive felt less like an anchor and more like a relic from a past life. A path had been cleared. I was ready to walk it. Following my conversation with Evelyn, I completely overhauled my business. Hearth and Harrow felt too quaint, too small for the vision that was now taking shape. I rebranded as Rootstock Solutions, shifting from a B2C design service to a B2B software company. I created a subscription-based platform designed for small to mid-sized grocers and specialty food shops, a market that was being ignored by the major tech players. My software would help them manage inventory from small-scale local suppliers, streamline orders, and track sales data in one elegant, user-friendly interface. The first 6 months were a blur of caffeine and code. I took a part-time job waiting tables to pay for a new hard drive and server space, working on rootstock from 10 p.m. to 4 a.m. I hired my first employee, Ben, a brilliant UX design student from RISD who was willing to work for a small stipend and the promise of equity. Our office was still my tiny apartment. We used stacked books for monitor stands and my kitchen table as a conference room, our plans mapped out on a giant whiteboard propped against the wall. It was scrappy and exhausting, but it was electric. That autumn, after 93 rejections from cold outreach, I received an email from a woman named Priya Singh, the head of operations for Viridian Markets. They were a chain of upscale organic grocery stores with 42 locations across the Midwest, known for their commitment to sourcing from local farms. Their current inventory system was a clunky, outdated mess. Priya's email was brief and to the point. Your website claims you can integrate dozens of small vendors into one seamless ordering system. Show us. I read the email 5 times, my heart pounding. For the next week, Ben and I barely slept. We built a customized, live demo that simulated Viridian's exact operational needs, complete with a beautiful dashboard and predictive ordering analytics. When Priya called after the virtual presentation, there was no hesitation in her voice. We need this rolled out in all stores by the end of Q2. Can you handle a project of this scale? I looked at Ben, who gave me a firm, determined nod. Yes, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. But I'll need to meet with your IT department to discuss API integration and data migration. Where is your headquarters? Chicago, she replied. My first time on an airplane was for that meeting. I flew to Chicago wearing a blazer I'd bought on clearance and shoes that were a half size too small. I walked into Viridian's gleaming corporate office, a glass and steel tower overlooking Lake Michigan, feeling like an imposter. But as I stood before their executive team, answering complex technical questions, a new kind of confidence settled over me, one forged in late nights and fueled by the unwavering belief in what I had built. The final contract was for $480,000, with a third paid up front to begin implementation. I sat in the taxi back to the airport, clutching my laptop bag, and watched the city lights blur past the window. I didn't weep or celebrate. I just felt a profound, quiet sense of arrival. From that day forward, Rootstock Solutions grew at an explosive rate. The successful Viridian deployment became our ultimate case study. They referred us to 2 other regional chains. One of them, a specialty food distributor based in Texas called Sagebrush Provisions, signed a contract for $750,000. I finally moved out of my tiny apartment. We leased our first real office space in downtown Providence, hired a team of 5 full-time engineers, a project manager, and a sales director. Within 2 years, Rootstock had offices in Providence and Chicago. We were serving over 70 retail chains, our platform evolving into a sophisticated ecosystem that handled everything from farm-to-shelf logistics to consumer purchasing analytics. In our 3rd year, our annual revenue topped $1.5 million, with a net profit of over $400,000. By year 4, I was asked to be a keynote speaker at the National Food Tech Symposium. After my speech, a man in a tailored suit approached me. Cora Hayes? I'm Victor Lin, a partner at Northgate Ventures. We've been tracking Rootstock's growth. If you're ever considering an acquisition, we'd be very interested in starting a conversation. I smiled and took his card, but made no commitments. In the weeks that followed, 3 more acquisition offers landed on my desk, the highest valuing Rootstock at $40 million. Ben, now my COO, looked at the offer letter with wide eyes. Cora, this is life-changing money. If you want to sell, I get it. But we're not done building, are we? I looked at our product roadmap, a wall covered in colored sticky notes detailing the future of our platform. I knew exactly where we were going. I politely declined all 3 offers. Rootstock was more than a company. It was the physical manifestation of the path I had forged for myself, a path my family had declared a dead end. Selling it would feel like walking back into that silent, judgmental dining room and admitting defeat. Even as my professional life soared, I kept my personal life grounded. I still drove a reliable but modest sedan and lived in a comfortable but unpretentious apartment in a quiet Providence neighborhood. When people asked what I did, I'd simply say, I run a small software company for grocery stores. My family, meanwhile, remained predictably distant. My mother's monthly calls were less about my well-being and more like press releases about Liam's latest triumphs, making junior partner at his firm, buying a sprawling house in a wealthy Boston suburb. I learned to listen with a serene detachment, a quiet observer of a life I was no longer part of. Then, the foundations of their perfect world began to crack. My father, Marcus, was forced into an early retirement at 63 when his college faced budget shortfalls and downsized the history department. A few weeks later, my mother was diagnosed with a rare neurological disorder that required expensive, experimental treatments her insurance wouldn't cover. When Liam learned of their financial strain, his response was swift but unhelpful. He was over-leveraged himself with a new mortgage and his children's exorbitant private school tuition. He couldn't help. I found out not because they called me, but because my mother, in a moment of distress, accidentally forwarded me an email from their bank. A single line jumped out: mortgage payment is now 30 days past due. Below it was a pharmacy bill for over $2,200. They would never ask me for help. In their minds, I was still the struggling artist, the daughter who had chosen folly over security. But I knew that without intervention, they would lose the house that had been the backdrop for my entire childhood. I contacted a lawyer, a sharp woman who had helped me structure Rootstock's early contracts. I asked her to create a blind trust, which we named the Amston Legacy Fund. Posing as a philanthropic organization dedicated to supporting retired academics, the trust began making their mortgage payments. My parents received a formal letter informing them that due to my father's long and distinguished career, an anonymous benefactor had secured their loan. They never questioned it. At the same time, I had my lawyer establish a shell corporation, Keystone Editorial Services, registered out of state. Through Keystone, I offered my father a freelance contract to write a series of essays on American historical pedagogy for a new educational platform. The compensation was $2,500 a month. My father, his pride salvaged, began telling friends he was working as a senior historical consultant. And that wasn't all. I learned through a stray comment on social media that Liam was pulling his 2 children out of the prestigious preschool they attended because he could no longer afford it. A week later, 2 new scholarships, funded by the New England Children's Initiative, appeared at the school. They were for the exact amount of tuition, designated for 2 students, a boy named Noah and a girl named Sophie. Liam posted a lengthy update about how, through sheer persistence and a bit of luck, he had secured funding for his children's education. I read it, a sad, hollow feeling in my chest. Over the next 3 years, I quietly funneled over $150,000 to my family, covering their home, my father's manufactured income, my mother's medical care, and my niece and nephew's schooling. It was all meticulously arranged, a web of legal entities designed to protect my anonymity. I was living 2 completely separate lives. At work, I was Cora Hayes, CEO, featured in Forge and Future magazine as the tech founder who was revolutionizing the local food economy. To my family, I was still the dropout, the cautionary tale. Every Thanksgiving, I would rent a basic car, drive to Amston, and sit at their table, listening to my mother ask if I'd ever considered finishing a degree, just to have something to fall back on. My father would nod sagely, a silent pardon for a life he still deemed a failure. And I would say nothing, quietly paying the bills that kept their world intact. That year, Thanksgiving arrived on a bitterly cold New England day. I came home not with a bottle of wine, but with a leather satchel containing a meticulously organized binder and a slim USB drive. I had decided that the silence had gone on long enough. When I entered the house, my mother was arranging chrysanthemums in a vase, her movements precise and controlled. My father was in his armchair, engrossed in a biography of a president, offering me a perfunctory nod. Liam and his wife, Sarah, were corralling their children. "Noah, don't touch Aunt Cora's bag," Sarah chided. "We don't know where it's been." The casual sting of the remark was familiar. I just smiled faintly. Dinner began at 7 o'clock sharp. My father stood to offer the annual toast, a short speech praising Liam's recent legal victory and the intellectual curiosity of his grandchildren. My name was, as always, conspicuously absent. As the family began to eat, I cleared a space in front of my parents and placed the binder on the table. "I have something I'd like to share," I said, my voice even and calm. My mother's fork paused midair. Liam shot me a look of weary annoyance. I opened the binder. The first page was a copy of the Forge and Future feature, with a full-page photo of me at our Chicago office. The headline read, "Cora Hayes, the quiet visionary behind Rootstock Solutions, the billion-dollar idea reshaping America's food supply chain." My father picked up the magazine page, his brow furrowed in disbelief. "What is this?" he asked, his tone laced with suspicion. "Some kind of mock-up?" "It's my life, Dad," I said softly. "I founded Rootstock Solutions 8 years ago. We now employ 250 people in 3 cities. The company's last valuation was $62 million. And for the past 3 years, I have been the sole reason this family has stayed afloat." One by one, I laid out the documents. Bank statements from the Amston Legacy Fund showing every mortgage payment. Copies of my mother's medical bills, paid in full by an anonymous trust one controlled. The consulting contract between Keystone Editorial Services and my father. The scholarship letters for Noah and Sophie. The evidence was irrefutable, laid bare on the polished mahogany of the dinner table. The room was utterly still. My father pushed his chair back, his face a mask of crimson disbelief. "This is a lie," he sputtered. "A self-taught designer doesn't build a company like this. You're deceiving us. You're deceiving everyone." "The only one deceiving himself is you," I replied, my voice unwavering. "I kept this quiet because I thought preserving your pride was more important than living in my own truth. But I am done shrinking myself to fit into this family." My mother's voice was a ragged whisper. "Cora, why wouldn't you tell us?" I looked at her, the years of quiet pain finally finding a voice. "Because every time I tried to share my world with you, you met it with condescension or pity. You never saw me. You only saw the daughter who had failed to meet your expectations. So I decided to help you without the burden of your judgment." Liam leaned forward, his expression cold and dismissive. "So you've been playing the martyr? I work 80-hour weeks in a cutthroat legal world. You sit behind a computer and get lucky with some app, and now you think you're our savior? It's pathetic." "My struggle is not less valid than yours simply because you can't comprehend it," I countered, my gaze meeting his. "I have slept on the floor of my office. I have poured every dollar I had and every ounce of my being into building this. I built it from nothing." My father slammed his palm on the table, the silverware rattling. "Enough. I will not sit here and be lectured by a fraud. You are a disgrace to the values this family stands for. Any money you've made was clearly through some dishonest means." I stood up. There were no tears, no shouting. Just a vast, quiet clarity. "So this is it. You don't want the real me. You just want the story you wrote for me. Fine." I gathered the documents, placing them back in the binder with steady hands. As I turned to leave, my mother reached out, her fingers brushing my arm. "Cora, what about next month? The bills?" I looked at her, my voice barely a whisper. "Mom, you can't call me a disgrace and cash my checks in the same breath. As of tonight, the support ends." I walked out of that house and into the biting November air. It was starting to snow, the flakes melting on my face. Each one felt like a small, cold baptism. For the first time, I felt utterly and completely free. I left Massachusetts the next day. 3 years prior, I had purchased a small, weathered cedar shake house on a quiet cove in Port Blossom, Maine. It had a stone fireplace and a wide deck overlooking the Atlantic, a place where the scent of salt and pine filled the air. Until then, it had been a weekend escape. Now, it was my sanctuary, my home. I immediately authorized my lawyer to send formal notices of termination to all parties. The Amston Legacy Fund was dissolved. Keystone Editorial Services terminated its contract with my father. The scholarships for Liam's children would not be renewed. There were no explanations offered. None were owed. I moved Rootstock's headquarters to a bright, airy office space in nearby Portland, Maine. Ben and a few other key team members, my loyal inner circle, relocated with me. A new chapter, boss? Ben asked as we stood in the empty office, the sound of seagulls crying outside. The first authentic one, I replied. Rootstock didn't just survive the move, it flourished in the clean, focused air of our new home. We launched a new AI-driven logistics module that attracted a massive new round of investment, pushing our valuation north of $85 million. I no longer hid my success. I drove the car I wanted, I wore clothes that made me feel good, and I spoke openly about my journey. I didn't have to pretend to be small to make others feel big. It was in Maine that I met Daniel. He was an architect who specialized in sustainable, community-focused design. We met at a local fundraiser for coastline preservation. He had a kind, easy laugh and eyes that held a genuine curiosity about the world. We talked for hours, first about passive solar design, and then about our shared love for old jazz records and long, rambling hikes. With Daniel, there was no pretense. He was fascinated, not by my net worth, but by the resilience it took to build my life. "You built an entire empire in secret," he said one evening as we sat on my deck, watching the moon rise over the water. I laughed, a real, unburdened sound. I think I was afraid that if they knew, they'd try to claim it, to reshape it into something that fit their narrative. And now? Now, anyone who can't accept my life as it is doesn't get a place in it. The memory of that final Thanksgiving dinner no longer held a sting. Instead, it became a compass, a reminder of the life I had chosen to build instead. I began thinking about all the other chorus out there, the brilliant, unconventional minds without the right pedigree or connections. I established the Seedling Grant, a foundation to provide funding and mentorship to entrepreneurs from non-traditional backgrounds. We didn't look at GPAs, we looked at passion, grit, and the power of an idea. Our first grant recipient was a young woman from rural Appalachia who had developed a low-cost water filtration system. During our first video call, she cried. "I never thought anyone would take a chance on me," she said. "My application just said high school diploma." I smiled. Maybe you were just talking to the wrong people. One afternoon in early summer, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. The screen read, Liam Hayes. I almost let it go to voicemail, but on an impulse, I answered. "Cora? It's me." His voice was different. The arrogant, dismissive edge was gone, replaced by something quieter, more hesitant. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For that night. For everything. What you did for the kids, for Mom and Dad. Thank you. I didn't know what to say, so I simply said, "You're welcome, Liam." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a start. A few weeks later, a handwritten letter arrived, the penmanship formal and familiar. It was from my father. "Cora," it began. "I do not possess the words to adequately express the depth of my error. I spent my life studying history, yet I failed to recognize a pioneer in my own home. My pride, my rigid adherence to what I considered a worthy life, blinded me to the remarkable woman you had become. When you laid out the truth that night, my world did not collapse because of what you had done, but because I finally understood what I had failed to do, to see you, to honor you. I am proud of you. I know I have no right to be, but I am." I read the letter a dozen times. No tears came, but a tight knot in my chest I hadn't known was there began to loosen. I didn't call. A week later, I sent a postcard from Port Blossom. A picture of the rocky coast. On the back, I wrote, "Thank you for the letter. I'm building a life I love. If you want to be a part of it, the only requirement is respect." I didn't go back to Amston. I didn't try to recreate the family I once yearned for. But I did open a door, just a crack. This time, it would be on my terms. One crisp autumn evening, I hosted a small gathering at my home. Daniel was there, as were Ben and his wife, and a few of the young founders from the Seedling Grant. We sat around a long wooden table on the deck under a string of glowing lights, the sound of the ocean a steady rhythm in the background. We shared stories and laughed, our conversations weaving together threads of purpose, innovation, and an honest, hard-won joy. I looked at the faces around me, this community I had built, this family I had chosen. They saw me, not for my valuation or my C-suite title, but for the person I was. I realized that my healing hadn't come from my family's apology. It had come the moment I decided I no longer needed their approval to be whole. My story isn't about revenge or proving someone wrong. It's about the quiet, radical act of choosing yourself. It's about understanding that you don't need to be born into the perfect circumstances to build a beautiful life. You only need the courage to design it for yourself. I didn't forgive them to let them back in. I forgave them so that I could finally and completely be free. And for the first time, I am not moving forward to prove anything to anyone. I am moving forward because I am already home.